Imagine you're inside a wooden hut in northern Japan. It's December 1915. Snow is pressed against the walls. The forest is black, and somewhere outside, a brown bear is moving through the dark. That shouldn't happen. By winter, this animal should be asleep in a den. But this one wasn't. And within 2 days, one village would count 7 dead, 3 wounded, 1 bear. The place was called Sankebetsu, a small settlement in Tomomai on the island of Hokkaido. Not the busy Japan most people picture. No neon streets, no crowded trains, just timber, snow, farmland, and forest. In the early 1900s, families were pushing deeper into Hokkaido, trying to turn wild land into farms. Around Rokusensawa, the local history points to about 15 families. 15. That's not a town. That's a handful of homes trying to survive a northern winter. And here's the problem. To those families, this was a new beginning. To the bears, it was still bear country. By 1897, the wider Tomomai area already had more than 200 farming households. People were cutting trees, storing crops, keeping food indoors, and building wooden houses right at the edge of the forest. Picture it like a thin wall between 2 worlds. Inside, fire, children, dried food and corn. Outside, snow, hunger, and an animal strong enough to tear through that wall. That animal would later be remembered as Kesagake. Some accounts describe him as about 2.7 meters tall when standing, with estimates of his weight ranging from roughly 340 to 380 kilograms. That's not just a big bear. That's heavier than a grand piano, with teeth, claws, and a winter hunger that hadn't switched off. But at first, nobody saw a monster. They saw a nuisance. A bear stealing corn. A bear too close to the houses. A bear that could be scared away. Or at least, that's what they hoped. Because in November 1915, before anyone in Sankebetsu became a victim, the bear had already crossed the line. It had found human food. And once a bear learns that a house can smell like winter survival, the forest doesn't end at the trees anymore. It ends at the door. To understand why this mattered, you need to understand what a brown bear is supposed to be doing in December. A bear doesn't just go to sleep. It spends the warmer months eating like its life depends on it. Because it does. Acorns, berries, salmon, anything with enough energy to carry a massive body through months of cold. Think of it like filling a furnace before the power goes out. If the furnace isn't full, the whole system starts to fail. In Hokkaido, brown bears usually den through the winter, roughly from December into March. So when people saw bear trouble in December, that was already a warning sign. A bear awake at the wrong time isn't just an animal out of place. It's a problem still running when everyone thinks the danger has shut down. Japanese accounts often use the word anamotazu for a bear without a den. That's the idea tied to Kesagaki, a bear that hadn't settled into winter sleep, possibly because it was hungry, disturbed, wounded, or all 3. And we have to be honest here. We know the outcome of the Sankebetsu attacks. We know the dates, the place, and the number of people killed. But we don't know exactly what was happening inside that bear's body or mind. No one took a modern blood sample. No one tracked him with a satellite collar. What we have is the event, the local records, and later reconstruction. Still, the pattern makes sense. Modern bear research in Hokkaido shows that when natural food drops, bears can move closer to towns. If pine nuts, salmon, or other key foods are scarce, a bear may search lower, closer, and riskier. Now add one more thing: human food. A wild bear that smells corn near a house isn't reading a map, it's following calories. And if those calories are easier than digging roots or chasing fish, that lesson can stick. Fast. So Sankebetsu wasn't just a village meeting a bear, it was a village meeting a hungry animal at the worst possible point in its yearly cycle. Winter outside, food inside, a wooden wall in between. and that wall was never built to stop him. The warning came before the massacre. In mid-November 1915, the bear appeared near the Ikeda family home and took corn. That detail matters because the first contact wasn't a dramatic attack. It was food. Quiet, ordinary food. The kind people stored because winter in Hokkaido wasn't forgiving. Then, on November 30, men tried to drive the bear off. According to later accounts, they fired at it, and afterward, they found blood in the snow. For most people, that would feel like relief. The animal was wounded. Maybe it would die somewhere in the forest. Maybe it would avoid the settlement now. You'd think pain would teach it to stay away. But hold on. A wounded bear can be more dangerous, not less. And a bear that's already learned where food is stored doesn't magically forget the smell of a house. The people of Sankebetsu had done what desperate settlers often do. They acted with the tools they had in the place they were trapped in against an animal they couldn't fully understand. And for a few days, nothing happened. That's the cruel part. Silence can feel like safety. Snow covers tracks. Night after night passes. The village starts to breathe again. Then came December 9. The bear came to the Ota house. Inside were Abe Mayu and a young child, Hasumi Mikio. A small home, a winter day. The kind of place that should feel protected just because there are walls around you. But walls only work against the things they were built for. A brown bear isn't one of them. The attack was fast, violent, and confusing. People outside didn't have a clear picture at first. They had sounds, broken wood, panic, then silence. By the time the settlement understood what had happened, Sankebetsu had its first 2 victims. And that alone would have been enough to break a village that small. Remember, this wasn't a town with hospitals, police cars, streetlights, and phones in every house. This was a thin line of families in deep snow, trying to survive winter with old rifles, fire, and whatever courage they could hold on to. So the neighbors did what people do after a tragedy. They gathered. They tried to protect the living. They tried to care for the dead. They tried to turn horror into order. And that may be the darkest part of the story. Because the bear came back. On December 10th, the settlement was no longer dealing with a bear that had wandered too close. It was dealing with an animal that had already found people, food, shelter, and weakness in the same place. Picture the fear in that room. Not fear of something far away in the forest. Fear of something that had already entered a home once and might do it again. The people gathered near the Ota house. Some men were armed. Others were trying to help the families. And in the middle of all that confusion, the bear moved again. According to later reconstruction, the bear approached another house, the Mayoke home. Inside were women and children who had come there because it seemed safer than being alone. Safer. That's the word that makes this so awful. They weren't running into danger. They were running from it. Then, the wall failed. The bear smashed through the window, came over the hearth, overturned a large iron pot, and scattered the fire. Imagine that for a second. The one thing humans have trusted for thousands of years, fire, thrown across the room like it meant nothing. You'd expect fire to stop a wild animal. Nope, not this time. The room became chaos, smoke, snow air rushing in, people trying to move in a space too small for panic. And the bear wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the world humans had built to keep the forest out. By the end of the second attack, the number was no longer 2. It was 7 dead, 3 badly wounded. For a settlement of about 15 families, that's not just a disaster. That's a wound through the whole community. Every name mattered. Every house knew the people inside the other houses. A loss like that doesn't stay in one family. It spreads through the entire place. And still, the bear wasn't gone. This is where the story shifts from an attack into a siege. People began to understand that the usual rules didn't apply. The bear had not been stopped by shouting, not by people gathering, not by fire, not by walls. And if the later accounts are right, not even by earlier gunfire. So now the settlement faced a terrifying problem. How do you defend wooden homes from an animal strong enough to enter them? The answer was ugly. More men, more guns, more waiting in the cold, more listening for sounds that might be wind or snow sliding from a roof, or something much heavier moving between the trees. And here's what makes it worse. Snow both helps and hides. It can show you tracks, a huge paw print pressed into white ground, a line through the forest, a direction. But snow can also erase everything. One storm, one heavy fall, and the path disappears. The animal becomes a shadow again. That's why the search became urgent. Each hour mattered. If they lost the trail, they weren't just losing a bear. They were losing the only line between the village and the next attack. And somewhere in the dark, Kisagake was still moving. Here's the twist. The Sankebetsu bear wasn't terrifying because it was a monster from a legend. It was terrifying because piece by piece, the situation around it started to make sense. A bear awake in December. A bear that may not have found enough natural food. A bear that had already smelled corn near a home. A bear that may have been wounded. A bear that had learned the one lesson no village ever wants an animal to learn. Houses can contain food, warmth, and people who can't move fast enough. That doesn't excuse what happened. It explains why the story is scarier than a simple animal attack. Because if it's just a monster, you can tell yourself it was one strange bear, one dark week, one nightmare from the past. But if it was a chain of conditions, then Sankebetsu becomes something else. A warning. And this is where we have to be careful. A lot of the detailed timeline comes from later reconstruction. Kimura Moritake began collecting memories in 1961, 46 years after the attacks. 46 years is a long time. Long enough for memories to blur, for details to shift, for fear to harden into story. So we know the core facts, the place, the dates, the deaths, the wounded, the bear. But some details around the exact movements, the exact order, and even the bear's exact weight have to be treated with caution. Estimates range from about 340 to 380 kilograms. Again, roughly grand piano weight, but with muscle. And honestly, that uncertainty doesn't make the story weaker. It makes it more human. Because real disasters almost never arrive as clean, perfect timelines. They arrive as confusion. Someone sees tracks. Someone hears wood break. Someone fires into the snow. Someone says the bear is gone. And then, the door gives way. By December 12th and 13, the question wasn't what kind of animal this was anymore. The question was whether the village could find it before it found them again. The final hunt came down to snow, blood, and nerve. Armed men moved through the forest, trying to read the ground before weather erased it. A track in snow can look obvious when it's fresh. A deep print, a drag mark, a direction. But give it wind, give it darkness, give it one more fall of snow, and the trail becomes nothing. Just white ground. That's why the pressure was brutal. If they lost Kisagake's trail, the village didn't just lose a target, it lost the only thing that made the bear visible. Later accounts credit the final shots to Yamamoto Heikichi, an experienced hunter brought into the search. On December 14th, 1915, he and another man followed the bear into the snowy forest. The distance, in some accounts, was about 20 meters, close enough that this wasn't just hunting anymore. It was standing inside the range of the thing everyone feared. Then came the shots. The bear fell. Sankebetsu had survived the animal. But here's the part that stays with you. Killing the bear didn't save the village from what had already happened. 7 people were dead. 3 were badly wounded. Homes had been broken into. Families had been ripped apart. And the feeling of safety, the quiet belief that a wall, a fire, or a group of neighbors could keep the forest out, was gone. A very human kind of fear had moved in. After the attacks, the settlement slowly emptied. That's such a cold detail, but it's important. The bear was dead, and people still left. Because sometimes survival doesn't mean staying. Sometimes survival means admitting that a place has become impossible to live in. Decades later, the memory was still there. In 1977, Okawa Haruyoshi, who had been a child during the time of the tragedy, helped place a memorial for the victims. Think about that. A child grows up under the shadow of one winter, becomes an old man, and still, the story is not over. In 1990, the site was reconstructed as a memorial location. A hut, a bear figure, a place where visitors can stand and see, in physical form, what had once been just terror in the snow. And that changes the story again. Because Sankebetsu isn't only about the people who died. It's about the people who had to keep living afterward. The ones who remembered the names. The ones who rebuilt the scene so others wouldn't forget. The ones who turned a disaster into a warning sign. Not a legend, a warning sign. More than a century later, that warning doesn't feel old. In 2025, Japan faced another wave of bear attacks. 238 people were injured and 13 were killed. Those aren't ancient numbers from a remote frontier. They're modern numbers from a country with roads, phones, schools, and emergency services. And the reasons still aren't simple. Some years, natural food is scarce. In some places, rural communities shrink, fields are abandoned, and the forest creeps closer to homes. There are fewer hunters in some areas, more encounters, more edges where human life and wildlife press against each other. That's the real lesson of Sankebetsu. It isn't that bears are evil. They aren't. It isn't that humans are always innocent either. We're not. The lesson is that the line between home and wilderness can look solid right up until it breaks. A wooden wall, a snowy field, a village road, a warning sign. We build these borders and call them safety. But the forest doesn't know where our story ends. And sometimes, it comes to the door.